To discuss this and much else, Betsy Woodruff joins us, political reporter for the Daily Beast, joining us from Washington. And Bets, it would appear the crosshairs have found Boeing. What to make of his chosen target?
It's really interesting, in part because Trump is not the only prominent Republican to be going after Boeing right now. The company got major criticism over the summer when news broke that they were working on putting together a deal to manufacture planes for Iran. Particularly Peter Roskam, who's a Republican member of Congress from Illinois, has been extremely critical of the fact that Boeing was willing to do business with the Iranian government. So it's interesting that now this company is getting criticism from sort of a number of fronts from within the Republican Party, especially because as a defense contractor, as a company that does a substantial amount of business with the U.S. government, typically those companies have pretty good relationships with Republicans on Capitol Hill and in the White House. This time, though, it seems like things might get a little bit dicey. So it's going to be really interesting to see how this plays out. Boeing is a huge company. It's massively influential, particularly in states like South Carolina, where it does a lot of manufacturing. Illinois, where it has a lot of employees. Those are states that are important to Republicans, and South Carolina more so than Illinois. But it's a major story, and the fact that Trump is naming them and trying to shame them is certainly consequential.
This plane of which we speak, the aircraft itself, would not be in use until 2024. Am I being overly cynical to also point out that it would be a new plane that even a re-elected Donald Trump wouldn't, in fact, be able to use?
It's a little perplexing. Yeah, the fact that Trump has decided to go after Boeing over this plane is a little bit tricky to understand, in part because the U.S. government spends so much money. The amount that we're spending on this plane is just a pittance compared to overall defense spending. There's reports this morning of massive amounts of waste that the Pentagon actually covered up. So the fact that Trump is singling out Boeing, there's probably a lot more to this story than we realize right now. And I imagine over the next couple hours, there will be some reports emerging about connections, perhaps, between Trump, his business interests, and Boeing. And it's weird that he would single out this particular company.
Well, and it seems also that we're now seeing singling out be something now of an economic agenda for the president-elect. Obviously, this comes on the heels of the high-profile deal with Carrier. We've now heard the president-elect, and it was an idea, again, pushed by the vice president-elect on the some programs today, will punish companies that leave the United States. They'll levy a 35% tariff against them. What to make of a strategy that essentially seems to have the president-elect, to a degree, picking one name out of a hat and taking to Twitter and having this ensue?
It's weird. It's an unusual approach to take. And of course, it has Hill Republicans deeply frustrated. I think Kevin McCarthy, who's the House Majority Leader, I think in a meeting with reporters yesterday, he was really critical of this idea of levying a 35% tax on U.S. businesses that move jobs overseas, that move manufacturing overseas. Of course, we don't know exactly how that would work, but the politics of it would be incredibly tricky because that essentially would be, or this is what Republican critics of Trump's proposal say, that it would essentially be a tax on American consumers. When you put a tax like that in place, the impacts are immediate and they're widely dispersed. Just about any American who buys a product made overseas could potentially see the cost of consumer goods go up. Meanwhile, at the same time, the benefits that Trump hopes that this kind of policy would create, saving manufacturing jobs, potentially he would hope even bringing back manufacturing jobs from overseas, those benefits would be harder to see. It would take longer for those benefits to materialize, and they'd probably be more concentrated in a few states rather than dispersed benefits. So politically, it's really tough. Of course, it goes against the free market orthodoxy that has dominated the thinking of Hill Republicans for the past 2 or 3 decades. And I think we see now a pretty big fight getting teed up for the next Congress.
So on the docket today, a Democratic mayor, a radio host, a CEO. On the docket yesterday, among many others, Al Gore, who met with Ivanka Trump, Donald Trump's eldest daughter, discussing climate change. Is this a president-elect for whom it is all optics all the time?
Probably. Trump probably more than anyone who's ever been in the White House, has a very keen eye for how things look on TV. I think that's a big part of why he's doing this thank you tour, because he understands that this stuff is incredibly valuable to people who produce TV and to viewers of TV. He understands that visuals are really important. That said, this isn't just about optics. I thought the fact that he's meeting with Rex Tillerson, who's the CEO of ExxonMobil, is particularly interesting. You know, Tillerson is a contender for Secretary of State, although a dark horse contender, and he actually has a pretty long-standing relationship with Vladimir Putin. In the 90s, Tillerson oversaw ExxonMobil's operations in Russia and got to know Putin at that point in time. In 2013, Putin actually gave Tillerson what I believe is called the Order of Friendship, the top honor, or one of the top honors the Russian government can give to foreigners. So if Trump was looking for somebody to be a Secretary of State who'd be able to help make relationships between the U.S. and Russia increasingly warmer, Tillerson would be a natural pick.
Who benefits then, in terms of optics, if nothing else, from a search for a Secretary of State that goes on without end at this point?
It's a good question. I think Trump probably enjoys the almost reality TV competitive nature of the Secretary of State contest. I think it's really interesting to watch how he talks about the different contenders. That said, for the folks whose names are getting batted around, it's extremely high risk. Of course, Romney looked a bit like a dog with his tail between his legs in a lot of those photos from him having dinner with Trump and Reince Priebus that I believe came out last week. And Rudy Giuliani seems to have burned through a bit of goodwill that he had with Trump by publicly basically begging to get the Secretary of State job, you know, doing multiple interviews at the Wall Street Journal where he touted his own qualifications. So it's risky and it's dicey for the folks who are competing for it. But of course, if you're a president and you want to watch some of the most powerful and influential people, well, men, at this point they're all men, in the country try to vie for your affections, I imagine it's an enjoyable spectacle.
Another name I actually mentioned, former Vice President and climate change activist Al Gore, who met yesterday with Ivanka Trump. Now, climate change is something to which the president-elect referred to as a hoax created by the Chinese. He threatened to pull the U.S. out of the Paris Climate Accords, but has since perhaps softened it, saying it is an issue that bears further viewing, if nothing else. What does this say, first, do you think, about Ivanka Trump's role in the transition team and moving forward?
Well, I think it says what people have been aware of to an extent for a while, which is that she has substantial clout. One thing that was kind of funny to me about the Al Gore meeting yesterday was that in the on-the-record conference call that the transition team communications folks have with reporters, Jason Miller, who's a spokesman for the transition team, said that Al Gore was not on the list of people who were scheduled to meet with Donald Trump. But then it turned out that Gore actually met not just with Ivanka, but also with Donald Trump yesterday in person. And, you know, Gore said they talked about some of these issues that are really important to him. So it's the kind of thing that makes conservatives who are skeptical of climate science go a bit apoplectic. Al Gore, of course, has been public enemy #1 for many of these conservative groups that have pushed back against what the scientific community views as non-debatable research on the nature of anthropogenic climate change. The fact that Trump would meet with Gore, would elevate him, would give him this platform is something that's really frustrating to a lot of Trump's base. But of course, it remains to be seen if Gore will have any sort of long-standing influence on the administration, if he'll have a working relationship with Mr. Trump, President-elect Trump, and Ivanka. But at this point, yeah, it's certainly unorthodox.
Betsy Woodruff of the Daily Beast, as always, we appreciate the insight.
Sure thing.